Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective, and then the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. If you like the show, you've been listening for a while, I'd encourage you to hit the subscribe button or leave a review. That'll let others know that the show is worth listening to and certainly help advance our cause and the mission of Christian education. I'm excited today to welcome our guest, Dr. Denver Daniel. He's the president of Open Door Christian Schools in Elyria, Ohio. He's a seasoned administrator, and he's led both public and private schools, and so that'll give him a unique perspective on the subject that we're talking about today, which is leadership. He's also done a good deal of school consulting on effective leadership practices, and I know he's a student of biblical worldview, and we've had a long relationship together, and I know you're going to enjoy our conversation on leadership today. So I'll introduce him just momentarily. But first, let's go ahead and set up today's show and tell you what I want to talk about, or let's go to school, as I like to say. Today, I want you to know more about the importance of passion in the leadership and how stewardship can fuel that passion. Again, the importance of passion in the leader, and then how stewardship can fuel that passion. This is the second episode into what I'm calling the leadership series because I want to focus on Christian leadership, particularly in Christian education, of course, and call attention to the habits and the character traits and some of the qualities of distinguished Christian leaders and explore this particular field. Let me start with this. The History Channel runs a series of TV shows that I just find fascinating. They're short, entertaining stories of American culture, and they all share the same title. They're really like little documentaries, only they're much more interesting in many ways. They're called things like this: the food that built America, or the cars that built the world, the brands that built America, or the titans that built the world. And they are fascinating. These are true stories of amazing people and products that have come to change our culture and our way of life, such as Henry Ford or Steve Jobs, and companies such as Coke or Apple or McDonald's, and products such as candy or frozen food or even microwave ovens. What all of these people have in common, time after time, is a passionate founder who just had a relentless determination to succeed. Whether alone or in a pair or in a small group, their passion to invent or create or market something not only revolutionized the culture, but it really thrust these men and women into positions of leadership. Nothing important happens in leadership without passion. Albert Mohler writes that passion is the greatest cause of attraction among followers. It can't be artificially generated or transmitted. In other words, you can't fake passion. If the leader's passion is artificial, the movement will sense it and it will stall. If the passion is authentic, the movement catches it and it passes on like it's contagious. This is what makes Christian leadership so unique. The Christian leader finds passion in the great truths of the Christian faith, obviously like the gospel. Mohler says no one who's truly experienced the transforming and redeeming power of the gospel can think of life without passion. Why is that so? Well, it's because our passion arises out of our conviction, those beliefs that we've talked about before on this show that we know are right and true, and so they lead us to action. It drives our behavior. It's a constant source of energy for the leader. It's not some temporary state of mind. Well, why is it then that sometimes, even as leaders, we tend to lose our passion or we tend to lose our energy at certain moments? Why do we feel like at times that leaders will all admit we feel like we're just kind of winging it, trying to get through the day? And so sometimes this wanes. And is this a problem? Well, the second idea I want to discuss today might help us here in this episode. Understanding leadership as stewardship may help us refocus and recenter. Listen, people lose passion when they get overwhelmed and distracted. Our vision gets cloudy and we lose focus on what's most important. But when we realize that we're merely stewards, we're not lords, we're not owners of those things that God's entrusted to our care, such as people, which is his most valuable and precious creation, of course, but the time and even the truth and the resources and all those things that he's entrusted to us, then we are reminded that really God's in charge here, and he's the only one sovereign. And so our place is just in his service. This frees us to do our part by following our convictions and removing some of the pressure that everything depends on us. So God's entrusted these things to us as leaders, and he's going to use us to accomplish his sovereign plan because, again, he's in control ultimately. So these are some of the ideas we want to talk about today with Dr. Daniel and our guest, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Let me make 2 quick summary points or chalkboard points, as we like to call them, to set up today's show. Point number 1, passion is critical for effective leadership, and it will be the greatest cause of attraction among followers. And chalkboard point number 2, leaders have great authority, but also tremendous responsibility. We're stewards of all that God's entrusted to us, and understanding leadership as stewardship increases passion and removes pressure. Well, now you know more. And as I like to say, when you know more, you can do more. You can not only think differently, but you can act differently, and you can say no more when you must. So with that, let's go ahead and put this lesson plan into action and bring in our guest, Dr. Daniel. Great to have you on our show today. Good to see you again, brother. Always a pleasure to talk to you about leadership.
Sai, so excited to be with you today. Also, my friend, I've been looking forward to this.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Dr. Daniel's a career educator, served as president of Open Door for 13 years now. Or not 13 years, since 2013, excuse me. He's passionate about creating a school culture where Christ is known across every touch point of a student's experience. And I know that to be true because I know him well. He's a consultant to numerous schools and has served on the ACSI Accreditation Commission, serving as the chairperson for the East Regional Accreditation Commission. I'm honored to serve there with him also. He holds a bachelor's degree in elementary education, 2 master's degree, and a doctorate in educational ministry specializing in Christian education and discipleship. So well-trained and well-trotted right through the educational circles. He's also credentialed as a Colson Fellow from the Colson Institute, a ministry that focuses on intense training for biblical worldview. And I am a CFIT, Colson Fellow in training, as they call. So I have a whole new appreciation for that now because I see what you were doing for those last couple of years, and I so wish I would have jumped on board when you told me to, which was a couple of years ago, and I could have done this with you because it is quite it's a great program, but it's very, very intense, and so I appreciate the training that you've done to get to that point as well. So thank you again for being here, and I know, like I said, it's going to be a good conversation, so appreciate that. Well, tell us a little bit about your tenure at Open Door. Yeah, you've seen so much change over the years. What stands out to you as maybe some of the significant, especially as you look back as a leader, maybe even in both public and private schools, but just your overall perspective?
Certainly. Well, since 2013, what you had shared, and boy, a lot has changed just culturally since 2013. The Lord has blessed us here. As far and what you're seeing across the landscape of Christian education, we hold that same commonality of growth in students. But I'd really like to say that since 2013, what we have been most passionate about is growth in our congruence and alignment to making sure that this school is a place that truly honors the Lord in all things. Sai, you'll know this as being a school leader. It's an imperfect striving, but it's a striving nonetheless. We truly want our students to be saturated with the biblical worldview in every touch point. I share a lot of times with our staff is that we don't want any breaks from that touch point. One of our jobs as Christian educators and Christian leaders is to ensure that there isn't deemed a sacred secular divide. We want all things falling under the King. And so we have been really intentional here at the school. It's one of the things that people actually take note of or share with us as a visit at an open house or a new parent about how that our shared values are truly something that we embrace here. and strive to impart. And I'm looking forward. Our first day of upper school is actually today. A little bit later in this afternoon, we'll be going in front of the 5 through 12 students at 2 different chapels, communicating to them about how this school is not really going to make sense to them unless they clearly see that this school is oriented and engineered towards honoring Christ and imparting a biblical worldview. And so that's a little bit of who we are. Again, it's an imperfect striving, but it's something that we love and cherish here at Open Door Christian Schools.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, right? It won't make sense if you're not familiar with that mission, purpose, foundation, why you're there. What are you seeing maybe in the culture that has shifted and changed in maybe the last 10 years that has really maybe changed the dynamic, for you as a leader? Anything that's really influenced you?
It's a great question. You had referenced that I had worked in public education prior to coming here. And honestly, Sion, you've heard me share this before, but to the audience, I would just say that 20 years in public ed, the last 11 here, and I ran away from public education when I left. There was still a Judeo-Christian ethic. I was part of a school system that was conservative. It's amazing how much you learn after you fully embrace Christian education. Where you said you wish you would have been a Colson Fellow 2 years earlier. I wish I would have been a Christian educator 30 years ago, because you see the power of education is always teaching towards an outcome, and there is no neutrality as we're teaching. And so, I was doing a lot of skill-based instruction, where a Judeo-Christian ethic was honored. But I wasn't able to provide the purpose of education, which is what Christian education does. And so just landing the plane really at your question, what I have observed as a flip is the dishonoring of the Judeo-Christian ethic. The concern that, what has worked from the founding of our country, what has worked for literally centuries, in this postmodern thought of no absolute truth and just honoring all viewpoints and letting feelings be a driver for decisions, as a primary driver, I should say. That has been really I would say, a significant difference between what I have observed 10 years ago to where we're at now. I could not in good conscience be where I was 12 years ago because of just the acceleration of anti-Christian thought and educating towards that end that you're seeing in other educational institutions. So that would be the biggest challenge, biggest distinction. And then this well, like our kids then are being challenged and saturated with all of that poor thinking, wherever they go. And so that is where the home and the Christian school and the local church just become that much more essential to try and give them an apologetic, a reasoned faith for how they're approaching life.
Yeah, great point there, especially as you finished up in that, right? What they're bringing to us now is so strongly ingrained from the culture that you kind of know from day one, we're going to have to really counter this with the biblical worldview and be intentional about it and have a plan. Because just coming here and winging it, with chapel Bible classes or maybe some, good role modeling in the classroom, that's just not enough. Because the world, what you said, they have a very intentional plan for how they want these kids to think and behave and eventually become voters, right? And citizens of society. And now all of a sudden we find ourselves saying, we better have a similar intense plan for them to walk them through to spiritual growth, or they won't make it.
You are so correct. It resonates so much with me. One of my favorite words in leadership, Sai, is intentionality. And if we are not intentional in our approach on how to be mentored, I know we're going to get into stewardship in a little bit, but we need to be intentional with the treasures that the Lord has entrusted us with. I just came out of faculty orientation last week. One of the things that I shared was a pretty raw video, actually, from Planned Parenthood that was very intentionally done from somebody that was really pleasant in a classroom setting. The classroom setting looked to be about 5th and 6th grade. And what was being espoused during that YouTube video that is accessible to anyone, there wouldn't have been any filter available to it, is something that would have horrified, I'm convinced, 95%, if not more, of your audience today. And it just shows the intentionality that people that would oppose our worldview, and this is not to make them an opponent or an enemy. We know that we have a greater adversary than that, but just to see the force behind what is trying to destroy a Christian worldview, as believers and influencers and people that love other people, we really have a responsibility to be intentional in our message as well.
Yeah, for sure. Would you agree with Moeller that passion is the greatest cause of attraction for followers? And how do you try to communicate passion there at ODCS?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that.
Okay.
And I will say, most people would say, well, it's because Denver's loud. That's he equates loud and passion. And I am a little loud, but passion is so much more than that, right? As I walked across campus yesterday, even when it was empty at the end of the day and the sun was kind of just setting on it, I just found myself thanking the Lord for the opportunity to be at work, and to be able to see students. And my wife and I were talking about yesterday, like if you were to tour the school with me, Sai, when I see students, even though I love you, you are my friend, we're walking through, I'm going to make sure that I acknowledge them and I say hello to them, and because they matter to me. There is a passion for me to impart truth to their lives, recognize them as people that are the object of God's affection, and I get to do this. This is I'm coming in on year 30, and I still get to love on kids every day. And what a blessing that is. And roles and different things certainly change. That sometimes we're a little bit distant from the day-to-day activities, but never losing sight of that classroom experience. I'll just share one of the things that I commonly refer to is Billy in the chair. Now, first of all, I really don't know Billy. But I've even in times past put a student desk at a convocation or a staff meeting to remind everyone we really do not exist as an institution if we are not constantly thinking about Billy in the chair. And so just allowing that passion to drive us, and then our passion. I love the quote that you read from Moeller. Allowing the passion of being loved by the Lord and being a kingdom citizen of His to motivate us to go and do what we do. We didn't earn it. It's like we're not entitled to it. He's given that to us as a blessing and a gift. And that should be the driving force behind what we do. So passion matters a lot. Why possibly, I'll just share this and turn it back over, but why possibly would a student want what I have if I am sad all the time, if I have no energy, or if I don't think it's relevant for their lives. And so passion matters a lot. It will allow us to pursue. We use 3 words around here: pursue Christ, persist for Christ, promote Christ. You're not going to do any of those 3 things as a disciple of his unless you have passion.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah, I think I know Billy. Yeah.
Yeah. We all have met Billy.
We call him by a different name here, but I think we know. Yeah.
It's like,
You know what I'm saying? That's exactly right. Well, and I think, you touch on a good point, and that is that, our passion, like Mueller said, comes with conviction because we ultimately want the student to believe what we're saying is true so they can act on it and live that out. And that's not going to happen without some degree of attraction to us and some degree of trust and a relationship that's probably going to come out of, man, this guy has a passionate conviction for what he believes to be true, and I want to get close to that. And I think, you've touched on something that really separates us from, your former life and other education in that, hey, maybe I can throw it out there, but, you've got to decide that for yourself, and you'll eventually get to decide what's true and what's not, and what may be true for you may not be true for me, and things like that. Well, yeah, we're teaching from a little bit different perspective. Well, completely different perspective, right? A completely
100%.
different worldview to say, hey, listen, this is the truth here, and there's some absolute standards. How do you confront that then? We've talked a lot about students, so shift to employees. How do you, with new employees or returning employees, how do you bring them on board in terms of saying, hey, I want you to share my passion? How do you try to give that to them?
I so love that question. I would say a couple of things to it. I think collaboration is important. I say to our leadership team all the time, we don't do things to our faculty and staff. We do things with them. So I think that if you really want to communicate passion, you need to make sure that you are doing it with them and hearing and being an exceptional listener, which we all know leaders are listeners. And so we don't go into our echo chambers. We truly try and listen to improve upon ourselves. And so I think collaboration is one important thing, Si. I think the other piece is we have something called the Patriot Way here. I like to say we didn't invent it because it's all based on scriptural truth. But the Patriot Way are 8 points that really make our shared values. They comprise our shared values. And when we hire, when we recruit, when we retain, when we make decisions with our staff, there is always an anchor point to our shared values, that if we cannot substantiate how that is advancing our shared values or the Patriot Way, then we need to go back to the prayer room and make sure that that's something that the Lord really wants us to do. But having those anchoring statements that are founded on the sufficiency and inerrancy of God's word, that is one of the things that it's a unifying element that allows passion to be cultivated. And so I would just say that those 2 areas, collaboration and then adherence to our shared values, and truly making sure that they're deeply embedded into our decisions, creates passion. Congruence will create passion because you know what you signed up for and you're seeing it in real life.
Yeah, and would you agree with what I said in the earlier that the followers, your employees, have you seen this over time? They can sense when it's authentic and when it's not. And when it's authentic, they follow, and when it's not. Have you experienced that?
100%. It's, one of the things that I share, just leadership principles. We want all of our faculty staff to be committed to the cause of Christian education. We also want our staff to be committed to rollouts of different things, the strategies, tactics. But Si, you and I have been in this thing long enough to know that sometimes the strategies and tactics that we think are great ideas are actually lousy. And so what I always stress when we are deeply committed to the cause of Christ, we're deeply committed to the Patriot way. When we start rolling out things that are strategies and tactics, what I'm looking for all the time is actually initially compliance. 20-year veteran that has seen a lot, that has witnessed a lot, that has a lot of experience. They may not be ready to just jump fully on board to this strategy. What they don't have a permission for is to decide that they're going to sit it out. And so I really stress, and this is where this whole congruence and passion, seeing that they will be compliant to the strategy, the tactic, whatever we're implemented, when they see that I am passionate about the cause. That creates trust capital in them, and they'll go with me. But when I'm all over the map, or if a leader is all over the map, that's going to create dissension, because they're not going to see the congruence necessary to stop doing something that they believe has been proven and jump to something else. So it's really imperative for the leader to make sure that they believe in what they're doing, they're exuding passion, that they're leading with open hands, which goes into that whole element of stewardship. And that does create, there's an old YouTube video out there called The First Follower. What you really want to do is create first followers, because the first followers are then the ones that create the multipliers. But the only way that you're going to see a first follower is if you're passionate as a leader, and there's congruence to what you're saying and what you're doing.
Yeah, good. Well, speaking of stewardship, what attracts you to this idea of leadership as stewardship? In other words, why does this ring true to you in terms of how you lead others? I mean, what, like I said, what pulls you into that idea?
I absolutely, it's actually my favorite topic, Si. So when you gave me a call, I'm like, this is fantastic. So the challenge with that is I will want to talk forever on it. So I will try and be brief. But my favorite life passage is Matthew 25, the parable of the talents or the coins, depending on what someone's version that they read from. But you see this beautiful picture of who we are as God's people. We are stewards of his creation. We are stewards of the ability that he gives us. And one of the things I've been coining around here a little bit this fall is what we really are stewards of God's glory. Like the abilities, the time, the talent, the treasure that he gives us, that's stuff that he wants to be glorified in. Matthew 5 talks about, hey, we're a light. Let people see your good works, towards the end of giving God glory. And so if we look at life as this is a stewardship of God's glory, we're an image bearer. And I want to use the whole of my life to honor Christ and give him glory. Then everything, you start becoming very, very passionate about it, and you recognize that everything is something that you, not just our finances, is something that we're yielding to the Lord in leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that, I was thinking about that, and others may be wondering, I get the whole leadership because I'm entrusted with other people. They work for me, but maybe tell me a little bit more about, it's bigger than that. Like you said, time and energy and reputation and the truth and God's glory. And, so I'm a steward of those things as well. Do you think the average, Christian understands that well? Christian leader understands that well?
I actually don't. But I don't mean that as an indictment about Christian leaders. I think a lot of times, Si, we view ourselves as disciples. we talk in language about being born again. I don't think a lot of times, we really spend time to really dissect what that means. So if we were really to think of ourselves as citizens in the kingdom of heaven, a citizen has a certain responsibility of stewardship. That's what makes a citizen. And so a citizen uses their life to be a representative of the country or kingdom that they belong to. And so I don't think that we look at ourselves in the Christian life often as citizens with the responsibilities to carry forth what are the laws of the kingdom. And the law of the kingdom, our kingdom, is that we are to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Well, when you look at that, that means everything that we are, the embodiment of what the Lord has given us, all is surrendered to him in an act of love for our flourishing. And I don't think a lot of times we look at that in that way. I think we actually do what the disciples did. I think we do what you've seen others do. We are Christians. We love Jesus, but we are taking the present worldview thinking and we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. That's why Christ on the Sermon on the Mount kept on saying, this is what you think. This is how you need to think. And that's the cool thing about what we get to do in Christian education, is that we are not just putting a chapel label on something or a Bible class label. We're teaching kids to take every thought captive. We're teaching kids to be transformed by the renewing of their mind. But in order for us to really teach that, we have to have some deep introspection of, do we even think like that? Or do we compartmentalize Christianity or Christian thinking? Or do we literally steward our lives from a kingdom worldview, a biblical worldview? So,
yeah. And what you're saying, obviously you can resonate with this in terms of the studying we're doing now in the Colson Fellows program, because if you remember, that fall series is all about that, because we talk a lot about, listen, don't forget, before sin, the creation mandate was be a steward, right? Exercise dominion over this creation. So, like I said, pre-sin, so pre-discipleship and all those things that, you're talking about. And obviously, Christ needing to come to earth, the original design was, I'm going to give you this planet and I want you to act as on my behalf, right? I'm going to act as, a steward here of all that I've created. You're my greatest creation. And now I want you to steward these things. And so that was the original design for mankind before the fall. So yeah, that's, like I said, going back to the basics in many ways, but boy, powerful truth there.
It's like, well, I always say, it's the simplicity. I share this with our faculty and staff a lot. Sometimes in Christian education, or just, we're always looking for something novel. Actually, redundancy with passion is not a bad thing. I tell people all the time, we all have rhythms. Don't allow your rhythm to become a rut. And so the rhythm of the Christian life is that we yield our abilities to the giver of those abilities. That's why I love Matthew 25. The steward, the owner gave to each person, whether it's 1, 2, or 5 talents, each according to their ability. And he expected them to steward it. And I love this element too, for growth. And so again, when you start thinking about the power of Christian education, us teaching with excellence towards providing our students with, here's what you're to do with all of that knowledge and that resume that you've crafted over the years. That's the joy of the job.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the point that I was trying to make in the opener, Moeller and others have said comments like, hey, leadership's only for the brave, right? I mean, it is hard work. It is exhausting work. It can be frustrating work. But ultimately, because you do answer for God or answer to God, because he put you in this position as a steward of all these things, yeah, it's only for the brave because, you're accountable only to him. Yet, as I was trying to make that point, when we realize that that's true, but also what's true is he's in charge of everything. I'm just stewarding it. He's in control. He's sovereign. So that does take some pressure off of me. Does that make sense with you? Does that resonate with you? I mean, is that how you kind of approach it as well?
It is. I'll say it like this. It is now. Early on in my leadership, and I would tell this to any aspiring leader or young leader, even if you're in a vocational ministry setting, one of the challenges is you think more rides on you than what it does. And by no means am I abdicating responsibility. Leadership is hard. Leadership, and many times is a ministry of persistence. Like the Lord will give you a vision for something, and there can be discouragement because there is opposition to whatever the vision is, and leadership. And I think this is where Moeller was going with that frame of it's only for the brave. Like there are times where you have to say and do hard things in the name of keeping things congruent or forwarding something that someone else hasn't quite caught the vision for. But that's why you're the leader. And that's why the Lord has entrusted you with that. Now, related to, though, the freeing element, I would say even in the recent era of my leadership, what I've came to realize is that old frame of you have one job. It's like our job is to faithfully proclaim the message of Christ. And so that a lot of times we want to try and do more than what we're actually capable of doing. But if I can narrow the lane for me as a steward of God's glory, my job is to faithfully proclaim Jesus Christ. And I like to add a little bit in word and deed. Well, that changes the frame for everything for here at the school, because now I'm looking, while I would love and I pray that the Lord does only what the Lord can do, which is to save and to grow, because God gives the increase and he's the one that illuminates the heart. My job, however, is to faithfully proclaim the truth. And so that is a very freeing element and something that as a leader, I actually can take inventory of. I can look at our classrooms and I can see, well, how are we integrating the truth of God's word in our content? I can look at the way that we behave at an athletic contest. And are we competing with intensity, but are we still yet doing it for the glory of God and love for fellow man? I can look at those things and measure faithful proclamation. We get ourselves into trouble and it becomes completely overwhelming when we try and take some measures that the Lord didn't intend us to take.
Right. And I completely agree with how you started. Oftentimes, a right understanding of stewardship is based on our long tenure of maybe wrong thinking, doing it the wrong way, trying so hard as a young administrator to get those wins, those successes under your belt, right? You're trying to impress everybody, climb the ladder, things like that. It all depends on me. And then at some point you get to your career and say, this is completely wrong thinking. Well, in that vein, experience is probably the best teacher in some of those ways, and maybe stewardship's one of them. In that vein, then, is it possible for us to train our students to value stewardship? Is it possible to learn a value for stewardship even as a young person, or is that something that's just going to come with time?
No, I absolutely think so. We talked a little bit about passion earlier in the modeling of that. So one of the things, and this is, I actually think that this is one of the biggest or largest dangers in Christian education, is that teachers, educators in general, we are educating to an outcome. All right. And so we would love to be able to say all of our kids are walking with the Lord. But you and I both know we've been doing this for a while now, so we can't say that. And it's really not ours to give. It's the Lord. What the Lord has given us and tasked us with the responsibility is to spread the word. And so where this ties back into your question is that I have this passion that all of my kids will be walking with the Lord, that they will accept Jesus as their Savior. Yet if my stewardship of my life does not reflect rhythms of my dependence upon the Lord, then I'm actually sending the wrong message. So if I come into a leadership team meeting, for example, and we have a task in front of us, but I don't take the necessary time with my team to go before the Lord and ask Him for help and support and guidance, then I'm really being incongruent. And going down to the student level, if I'm not modeling that, if I'm coaching cross country, which I did for 10 years, and I've never modeled to our students to go before the Lord to ask Him for support, wisdom, all of these, and I just go into, well, I'm a coach and I know how to coach and I'm just going to go into coaching mode. I'm actually sending a false narrative. I'm sending them a narrative that I don't want to send them. And so I actually think it absolutely can and be taught, should be taught. And it begins, and teaching it depends on how much we are actually modeling dependence upon the Lord. Because you're not going to be a steward if you don't feel like, if you're not modeling dependence upon Him. You're just going to be a self-made man, which is the cultural thinking. That's what the culture teaches. Work hard, you'll get this. Do this, you'll get that. And while we live in this earthly kingdom, Christ's kingdom flips that up on its head, and it says, no, as a steward, our stewardship means that we're depending on the Lord for our success. And so we ought to be modeling that in rhythms constantly. So we go to chapel, for instance, to orient ourselves to the Lord and to remind ourselves that we're stewards. We go to prayer so that we remind ourselves that we need His direction and guidance. That's an element of stewardship. And then I'll just say this and flip it back to you. And we do it from a place, going back to of passion. It's stewardship isn't weakness. Stewardship is wisdom. I recognize that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, that is all powerful, all wise, and all knowing, has plans for me. And so the wisest thing that I can do is consult my King, who gives me access to Him, on how I should live this life, or the directions that I take. So the short answer is, it can be taught, it should be taught, and thank God we see evidence that it's learned.
Yeah. And you're exactly right in relating it back to passion. That's what I was thinking as well. As stewardship, just like passion, they will observe it just like your employees do, and they will know if it's genuine and authentic or not. And if like you said, if they're observing that it's congruent, you're walking this out, maybe you're even transparent enough that they can, as a cross-country coach or even as a leader, when you get to know them and they know you well enough to say, well, I can tell that Dr. Daniel's burdened by this issue. And this is how he's handling it. He takes it to the Lord in prayer. He has people that are wise speaking into his life. He's doing the things that Christians do to overcome adversity. That's certainly going to speak to them. And this is how he stewards our organization well, because this is how he walks out his faith. And they're going to see that. I don't think, like you said, I don't think they're too young to not pick that up. They may not completely understand it as stewardship yet. They're 15, 16, but they will over time. Well, some of those convictions, as I think about, maybe the bigger picture here, and maybe we'll close with this, but, our leadership, as much as we don't like to talk about, has an endpoint, but those convictions that drive your behavior, that drive the passion, that drive the stewardship, those are the things that really are going to last. So what are some of your convictions about Christian education that really drive you to stay in your role and as a leader, and that you're really out there preaching to the public?
So it's great. Well, one of the things, this will sound so trite and cliche, but it's genuine. I have a passion to show people, show our kids, and teach our kids how to love Jesus. Often when I was a youth pastor and years gone by, when I and now here, like, I'm just passionate about introducing kids to Jesus. And a lot of times I find that we can be a little bit overly cerebral, talk about worldview. I'm passionate about those things. I mean, but at the end of the day, I want our kids to fall in love with Jesus. So passion number one is I do not want to allow Christian education to become an intellectual exercise. It is one, and loving the Lord with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength requires the challenging of your mind and the stretching of it, and for you to be in a place that you didn't think you were possible to reach. But at the same time, it's done from a place of love. So it's that whole difference of religion and relationships. That's one of my convictions. The other one that and I've mentioned it several times, is intentional congruence. I want no breaks taken at Open Door Christian Schools in how we try and message the truth of Jesus Christ. And that's why I always phrase it, and you heard me say it earlier, it's an imperfect striving. I mean, one only needs to look at my life, forget about others, to see that there are times of incongruence, but the passion that I have and what I hope to pass on is that we don't take breaks. Everything is surrendered to the throne. And then the third piece, and this matters a lot to me as well, is that excellence matters. It's one of our Patriot Way pieces. I want to be excellent for my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Going back to that Matthew 25 piece, I may only be a 1 talent guy. Cy Smith's a 5 talent guy. That's okay. Because the Lord counts the ability. What's not okay is for us not to grow it into excellence. And so I just want this quest to be as excellent as we can for the glory of our Lord.
Yeah, very good. Well, if the audience wants to know a little bit more about your work, your ministry, your school, I mean, if they've heard something that said, man, I'd like to follow up there, maybe even with Open Door, or just, more writings from you, what's the best way they can get in touch?
Great. Well, I would thank you for that. I would encourage everybody to check out at odcs.org. So Open Door Christian Schools, odcs.org. I do, if you want to learn a little bit more about me, you could look at the Office of the President. I do have a blog that we write occasionally on. So would really encourage you to check that out if you want to learn a little bit more. There, I also have a LinkedIn page under my name, Denver Daniel. You could access there as well. But love any and all conversations related to imparting a worldview that is biblical into the lives of our kids.
Yeah, well, great. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. Love the topic. Always love talking with you as well, brother. Appreciate you and your good work. And so, again, just thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Cy. Carry on, brother.
Yes, I appreciate that. Well, thank you also for joining me on the Clearly Christian podcast. And I trust that now you know more about the importance of passion in the leader and how stewardship can fuel that passion. Great topic today, and it was great to have Dr. Daniel with us. And again, if you like the episode, you like the show, and you follow along, please hit the subscribe button, leave a review. Again, let others know the show is worth listening to, and certainly help us advance the cause of Christian education. Because remember, the only way that we're going to turn things around in this country is to simply increase the number of people who live every day with a biblical worldview and see things from God's perspective. And the greatest hope that we have to get there is Christian education. Thank you again for joining me. This is Dr. Cy Smith with clearlychristian.com.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.